Foreign and Military Intelligence, Part 48. Resuming page 589. Separate Views of Senate Howard H. Baker, Jr. At the close of the Senate Watergate Committee, I felt that there was a compelling need to conduct a thorough examination of our intelligence agencies, particularly the FBI and the CIA and the FBI. Congress never had taken a close look at the structure or programs of either the CIA or the FBI since their inception in 1947 and 1924, respectively. Footnote 1. Pausing the reading to read footnote 1. Upon the expiration of the Watergate Committee in September 1974, I had the privilege to co-sponsor with Senator Waker S. 4019, which would have created a joint committee on Congress to oversee all intelligence activities. Resuming the reading. Moreover, there never had been a congressional review of the intelligence community as a whole. Therefore, I felt strongly that this committee's investigation was necessary. Its time had come. Like the Watergate investigation, however, for me it was not a pleasant assignment. I say that because our investigation uncovered many actions by agents of the FBI and of the CIA that I would previously have not thought possible, e.g., crude FBI letters to break up marriages or cause strife between black groups, and the CIA assassination plots. In our excellent intelligence and law enforcement institutions. Despite these unsavory actions, however, I do not view either the FBI or CIA as evil or even basically bad. Both agencies have a long and distinguished record of excellent service to our government. With the exception of the worst of abuses, the agents involved truly believed they were acting in the best interest of the country. Nevertheless, the abuses uncovered cannot be condoned and should have been investigated long ago. I am hopeful now that all these abuses have been fully aired to the American people through the committee's hearings and report, that this investigation will have had a cathartic effect, that the FBI and CIA will now be able to grow rather than decline. Such growth with a healthy respect for the rule of law should be our goal, a goal which I am confident can be attained. It is important for the future of this country that the FBI and CIA not be cast as destroyers of our constitutional rights, but rather as protectors of those rights. With the abuses behind us, this can be accomplished. Long-term improvement of intelligence community. On balance, I think the committee carried out its task responsibly and thoroughly. The committee's report on both the foreign and domestic areas are the result of extensive study and deliberation, as well as bipartisan cooperation in its drafting. The report identifies many of the problems in the intelligence field and contains positive suggestions for reform. I support many of the proposed reforms, while differing at times with the means we should adopt to retain those reforms. In all candor, however, one must recognize that an investigation such as this one, of necessity, will cause some short-term damage to our intelligence apparatus. A responsible inquiry, as this has been, will, in the long run, result in a stronger and more efficient intelligence community. As my colleague, Senator Morgan, recently noted at a committee meeting, such short-term injury will be outweighed by long-term benefits gained from the restructuring of the intelligence community. End of page 589, beginning page 590. With more efficient utilization of our intelligence resources. Former director William Colby captured this sentiment recently in a New York Times article. Intelligence has traditionally existed in a shadowy field outside the law. This year's excitement has made clear that the rule of law applies to all parts of the American government, including intelligence. In fact, this will strengthen American intelligence. Its secrets will be understood to be necessary ones for the protection of our democracy in tomorrow's world, not cover for the mistake or misdeed. The guidelines within which it should and should not operate will be clarified for those in intelligence and those concerned about it. Improved supervision will ensure that the intelligence agencies will remain within the new guidelines. The American people will understand and support their intelligence services and press their representatives to give intelligence and its officers better protection from irresponsible exposure and harassment. The costs of the past year were high, but they will be exceeded by the value of this strengthening of what was already the best intelligence service in the world. Footnote 2. Pausing the reading to read footnote 2. New York Times, January 26, 1976. Resuming the reading. The committee's investigation, as former Director Colby points out, has probed areas in which reforms are needed, not to prevent abuses, but to better protect and strengthen the intelligence services. For example, it is now clear that legislation is needed to make it a criminal offense to publish the name of a United States intelligence officer stationed abroad. Footnote 3. Pausing the reading to read footnote 3. I intend to propose an amendment to S. 400 to make it a criminal offense to publish the name of a United States intelligence officer who is operating in a covert capacity overseas. Resuming the reading. Moreover, the committee's investigation convinced me that the State Department should revise its publication of lists from which intelligence officers overseas predictably and often easily can be identified. Yet we have not been able, in a year's time, to examine carefully all facets of the United States' incredibly important and complex intelligence community. Footnote 4. Pausing the reading to read footnote 4. For many months, the committee thoroughly and exhaustively investigated the so-called, quote, assassination plots, end quote, which culminated with the filing of our report on November 18, 1975. This investigation was vitally important in order to clear the air and set the record straight, and it was instructive as to how, quote, sensitive, end quote, operations are conducted within our intelligence structure. But it necessarily shortened the time available to the committee to investigate the intelligence community as a whole. Resuming the reading. We have established that in some areas problems exist which need intensive long-term study. Often these most important and complex problems are not ones which lend themselves to quick or easy solutions, as Ambassador Helms noted in his testimony during the committee's public hearings. I would certainly agree that, in view of the statements made by all of you, distinguished gentlemen, that some result from this has got to bring about a system of accountability that is going to be satisfactory to the U.S. Congress and to the American people. End of page 590. The beginning of page 591. Now, exactly how you work out that accountability in a secret intelligence organization, I think, is obviously going to take a good deal of thought and a good deal of work. And I do not have any easy, ready answer to it, because I assure you, it is not an easy answer. In other words, there is no quick fix. Hearings, Volume 1, September 17th, 75, page 124. Thorough study necessary in several areas. The areas which concern me the most are those on which we, as a committee, have been able to spend only a limited amount of time. Footnote 5, i.e., espionage, counterintelligence, covert action, use of informants, and electronic surveillance. Pausing the reading to read footnote 5. The committee's mandate from Congress dictated that the abuses at home and abroad should be given detailed attention, and there are only a finite number of important problems which can be examined and answered conclusively in a year's time. Resuming the reading. It is in these areas that I am concerned that the committee be extremely careful to ensure that the proper thorough investigatory predicate exists before any permanent reform recommendations be enacted into law. Our investigation, however, has provided a solid base of evidence from which a permanent oversight committee can and should launch a lengthy and thorough inquiry into the best way to achieve permanent restructuring in these particularly sensitive areas. It is my view that such a study is necessary before I am able to endorse some of the committee's recommendations, which suggest a far-reaching alteration of the structure of some of the most important facets of our intelligence system. Therefore, while I support many of the committee's major recommendations, I find myself unable to agree with all the committee's findings and recommendations in both foreign and domestic areas. Nor am I able to endorse every inference, suggestion, or nuance contained in the findings and supporting individual reports, which together total in the thousands of pages. I do, however, fully support all of the factual revelations which our report contains concerning the many abuses in the intelligence field. It is important to disclose to the American people all of the instances of wrongdoing we discovered. With such full disclosure, it is my hope that we can turn the corner and devote our attention in the future to improving our intelligence gathering capability. We must have reform, but we must accomplish it by improving, not limiting, our intelligence productivity. I am confident this can be done. Calm, cumulative effect of recommendations. With regard to the totality of the committee's recommendations, I am afraid that the cumulative effect of the numerous restrictions which the report proposes to place on our intelligence community may be damaging to our intelligence effort. I am troubled by the fact that some of the committee's recommendations dip too deeply into many of the operational areas of our intelligence agencies. To do so, I am afraid, will cause practical problems. The totality of the proposals may decrease instead of increase our intelligence product. And there. End of page 591, beginning page 592. May be serious ramifications of some proposals which will, I fear, spawn problems which are as yet unknown. I am unconvinced that the uncertain world of intelligence can be regulated with the use of rigid or inflexible standards. Specifically, I am not convinced that the answers to all our problems are found by establishing myriad executive branch boards, committees, and subcommittees to manage the day-to-day operations of the intelligence community. We must take care to avoid creating a Rube Goldberg maze of review procedures which might result in a bureaucratic morass which would further increase the burden on our already heavily overburdened tax dollar. We should not over-reform in response to the abuses uncovered. This is not to say that we do not need new controls, because we do, but it is to say that the controls we impose should be well-reasoned and add to, not detract from, the efficiency of our intelligence gathering system. Increased executive branch controls are only one half of the solution. Congress for too long has neglected its role in monitoring the intelligence community. That role should be significant, but not all-encompassing. Congress has a great many powers, which, in the past, it has not exercised. We must now do our share, but at the same time, we must be careful in reacting to the abuses uncovered, that we not swing the pendulum back too far in the direction of Congress. Both wisdom and the constitutional doctrine of separation of powers dictate that Congress not place itself in the position of trying to manage and control the day-to-day business of the intelligence operations of the executive branch. Vigorous oversight is needed, but it should be carefully structured in a new, powerful oversight committee. I believe this can be achieved if we work together to attain it. In moving toward improving our intelligence capability, we must also streamline it. It is in this approach that my thoughts are somewhat conceptually different from the approach the committee is recommending. I am concerned that we not overreact to the past by creating a plethora of rigid, quote, "thou shalt not," end quote, statutes, which, while prohibiting the specific hypothetical abuse postured in the report, cast a wide net which will catch and eliminate many valuable intelligence programs as well. The committee report recommends the passage of a large number of new statutes to define the functions of and further regulate the intelligence community. I am troubled by how much detail should be used in spelling out the functions and limitations of our intelligence agencies for all the world to see. Do we want to outline for our adversaries just how far our intelligence agencies can go? Do we want to define publicly, down to the last detail, what they can and cannot do? I'm not sure we do. I rather think the answer is found in establishing carefully structured charters for the intelligence agencies with accountability and responsibility in the executive branch and vigilant oversight within the legislative branch. End of page 592, beginning page 593. President's Program. It is my view that we need to take both a moderate and efficient course in reforming our intelligence gathering system. In that regard, I think President Ford's recent restructuring of the intelligence community was an extraordinarily good response to the problems of the past. The President's program effected a massive reorganization of our entire intelligence community. It was a massive reaction to a massive problem which did not lend itself to an easy solution. I am pleased that many of the committee's recommendations for intelligence reform mirror the President's program and format. Centralizing the command and control of the intelligence community, as the President's program does, is the best way to ensure total accountability and yet not compromise our intelligence gathering capability. Therefore, I endorse the basic framework of intelligence reform outlined by President Ford as embodying 1. A single permanent oversight committee in Congress with strong and aggressive staff to oversee the intelligence community. Footnote 6. Pausing the reading to read footnote 6. My original support for a single joint committee of Congress has evolved somewhat, as affected by the events of this past year's House Intelligence Committee investigation, to support for a single Senate committee. However, I also favor the mandate of the new committee, including, as does the present S-400, a charge to consider the future option of merging into a permanent joint committee upon consultation with an action by the House of Representatives. The moment for meaningful reform is now, and we must not lose it by waiting for a joint committee to be approved by both houses of Congress. Resuming the reading. 2. The Committee on Foreign Intelligence to manage the day-to-day operation of the intelligence community. 3. The reconstituted Operations Advisory Group to review and pass upon all significant covert action projects. Footnote 7. Pausing the reading to read footnote 7. I think a rule of reason should apply here. All significant projects certainly should receive careful attention from the group. On the other hand, I would not require a formal meeting with a written record to authorize the payment of 2 sources in X country at $50 per month to be changed to the payment of 3 sources in X country at $40 per month. Resuming the reading. And 4. The Intelligence Oversight Board to monitor any possible abuses in the future, coordinating the activities and reports of what I am confident will be the considerably strengthened offices of General Counsel and Inspector General. This framework will accomplish the accountability and responsibility we seek in the intelligence community with both thoroughness and efficiency. Within this framework, Attorney General Levi's new guidelines in the domestic security area will drastically alter this previously sparse supervised field. And these guidelines will centralize responsibility for domestic intelligence within the Department of Justice and will preclude abuses such as COINTELPRO from ever reoccurring. Footnote 8. Pausing the reading to read footnote 8. I applaud the detailed guidelines issued by the Attorney General to reform the Department's entire domestic intelligence program. I think he is moving in the right direction by requiring the FBI to meet a specific and stringent standard for opening an intelligence investigation, i.e., the Terry versus Ohio standard. Resuming the reading. Specific reforms. Within this basic framework, we must look to how we are going to devise a system that can both effectively oversee the intelligence community and yet not impose strictures which will eliminate its productivity. It is to this end that I suggest we move in the following direction. End of page 593, beginning page 594. 1. Demand responsibility and accountability from the executive branch by requiring all major policy decisions and all major intelligence action decisions be in writing and therefore retrievable. Footnote 9. Pausing the reading to read footnote 9. Never again should we be faced with the dilemma we faced in the assassination investigation. We climbed the ladder of authority only to reach a point where there were no more written rungs. Responsibility ceased, accountability ceased, and in the end, we could not say whether some of the most drastic actions our intelligence community or certain components of it had ever taken against a foreign country or foreign leader were approved of or even known of by the president who was in office at the time. Resuming the reading. 2. I recommend, as I have previously, that Congress enact a variation of S-400, which I had the privilege to co-sponsor. S-400 is the Government Operations Committee bill, which would create a permanent oversight committee to review the intelligence community. The existing congressional oversight system has provided infrequent and ineffectual review, and many of the abuses revealed might have been prevented had Congress been doing its job. The jurisdiction of the new committee should include both the CIA and the FBI, and the committee should be required to review and report periodically to the Senate on all aspects of the intelligence community's operations. In particular, I recommend that the committee give specific, careful attention to how we might improve as well as control our intelligence capability in the counterintelligence and espionage areas. Three, simultaneously with the creation of a permanent oversight committee, Congress should amend the Hughes-Ryan Amendment to the 1974 Foreign Assistance Act 662, which now requires the intelligence community to brief six committees of the Congress on each and every major intelligence action. Former Director Colby strikes a responsive chord when he complains that the present system will lead to leaking of vital intelligence information. We must put a stop to this. This can be done by allowing the intelligence community to report only to a single secure committee. 4. Concomitantly with improved oversight, we in Congress must adopt stringent procedures to prevent leaks of intelligence information. In this regard, I recommend we create a regular remedy to prevent the extraordinary remedy of a single member of Congress disclosing the existence of a covert intelligence operation with which he does not agree. Such a remedy could take the form of an appeal procedure within the Congress so that a single member, not satisfied with a committee's determination that a particular program is in the national interest, will be provided with an avenue of relief. This procedure, however, must be coupled with stringent penalties for any member of Congress who disregards it and discloses classified information anyway. I intend to offer an amendment to institute such a remedy when S-400 reaches the Senate floor. Footnote 10. Pausing the reading to read footnote 10. I would favor a procedure within the Congress which would in effect create an avenue of appeal for a member dissatisfied with the committee determination on a classification issue. Perhaps an appeal committee made up of the majority and minority leaders and other appointed members would be appropriate. Leaving the mechanics aside, however, I believe the concept is important and can be implemented. Resuming the reading. 5. The positions of General Counsel and Inspector General in the intelligence agencies should be elevated in importance and given increased powers. I feel that it is extraordinarily important that these. End of page 594, beginning page 595. Positions, particularly that of General Counsel, be upgraded. For that reason, I think it is a good idea to have the General Counsel to both the FBI and the CIA subject to Senate confirmation. This adds another check and balance, which will result in an overall improvement of the system. Footnote 12. Additionally, I feel that it is equally important to provide both the General Counsel and Inspector General with unrestricted access to all raw files within their respective agencies. Footnote 12a. This was not always done in the past and will be a healthy addition to the intra-agency system of checks and balances. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 12a. I differ with the committee in that I would not have the General Counsel and Inspector General file reports and or complaints concerning possible abuses with the Attorney General. Rather, I think the more appropriate interface in a new oversight system would be for both to take complaints to the Intelligence Oversight Board and the new Congressional Oversight Committee. The Attorney General would remain the recipient of any and all complaints regarding possible violations of the law. Footnote 12a. I support the committee's recommendations that agency employees report any irregularities directly to the Inspector General without going through the chain of command, i.e., the particular division chief involved. Resuming the reading. 6. I am in favor of making public the aggregate figure for the budget of the entire intelligence community. I believe the people of the United States have the right to know that figure. Footnote 13. The citizens of this country have a right to know how much of their money we are spending on intelligence production, but they also want to get their money's worth out of that tax dollar. They do not want to spend that money for intelligence production, which is going to be handicapped, which is going to produce poor or inaccurate intelligence. Therefore, I am opposed to any further specific delineation of the intelligence community's budget. Specifically, I am opposed to the publication of the CIA's budget or the NSA's budget. It seems to me we are dealing with the world of the unknown in predicting what a foreign intelligence service can or cannot extrapolate from these budget figures. We received no testimony which guaranteed that if Congress were to publish the budget figure for the CIA itself, a hostile intelligence organization could not extrapolate from that figure and determine much more accurately what the CIA capabilities are in any number of vital areas. Without such testimony, I am not prepared to go that far. The public's right to know must be balanced with the efficiency and integrity of our intelligence operations. I think we can accomplish both by taking the middle road, publishing the aggregate figure for the entire intelligence community. It is this proposal that I have voted in favor of. There are a number of other specific findings and recommendations supported by a majority of the committee, which require additional brief comment. End of page 595, beginning page 596. Foreign intelligence recommendations. 1. Covert action. I believe the covert action capability of our intelligence community is vital to the United States. We must maintain our strength in this capacity, but we must also control it. The key and difficult question, of course, is how we can control it without destroying or damaging its effectiveness. In my view, the best way to both maintain strength and yet ensure accountability is to have strict control of the covert action programs through the Operations Advisory Group, with parallel control and supervision by the proposed Permanent Congressional Oversight Committee. Covert action is a complex United States intelligence capability. Covert action provides the United States with the ability to react to changing situations. It is built up over a long period of time. Potential assets are painstakingly recruited all over the world. Having reviewed the history of covert action since its inception, I do not look upon the intelligence agents involved in covert action as a modern-day group of bandits who travel the world murdering and kidnapping people. Rather, a vast majority of covert action programs are not only valuable but well-thought approaches through media placement and agents of influence which produce positive results. Covert action programs cannot be mounted instantly upon a crisis. It is naive to think that our intelligence community will be able to address a crisis without working years in advance to establish sources in the various countries in which a crisis might occur. These sources provide what is referred to as the, quote, infrastructure, end quote, which must necessarily be in place throughout the world so that the United States can predict and prevent actions abroad, which are inimical to our national interest. Footnote 14. Pausing the reading to read footnote 14. For example, the testimony before the committee established that the CIA's failure to act more positively in Portugal was a direct result of the absence of sufficient clandestine infrastructure. William E. Colby testimony, October 23, 75. William Nelson testimony, November 7, 75. Resuming the reading. I believe that were we to completely abolish covert action or attempt to remove it from the CIA and place it in a new separate agency, these structures would dry up, and when a crisis did come, our intelligence community would not be able to meet it effectively. Not only do I question the effectiveness a new separate agency for covert action would have, but such a restructuring would unnecessarily increase our already burgeoning bureaucracy. I think that it is important to realize that covert action cannot be conducted in public. We cannot take a Gallup poll to determine whether we should secretly aid the democratic forces in a particular country. I do not defend some of the covert action which has taken place in Chile, but the fact remains that we cannot discuss it publicly. We cannot discuss publicly the many successes, both major and minor, which the United States has achieved through the careful use of covert action programs. Many individuals occupy positions of power in the world today as a direct result of aid given through a covert action program. Unfortunately, we cannot boast of or even mention these significant achievements. In short, we cannot approach covert action from a public relations point of view. We should not forget that we must deal with the world as it is today, with our adversaries employing their equivalent of covert action. End of page 596, beginning page 597. We must either say that the intelligence community should have the power to address world problems in this manner, under the strict control of the President and Congress, or we should take away that power completely. I cannot subscribe to the latter. Finally, the issue remains as to how we can best control covert action through statutory reform. First, I believe the executive branch can and should carefully review each significant covert action proposal. This will be accomplished through the Operations Advisory Group under the program outlined by President Ford. Second, Congress can control covert action by passing legislation requiring that the new Oversight Committee be kept, quote, fully and currently informed, end quote. This, I believe, is the appropriate statutory language to apply to covert action. I do not agree with the committee's recommendation that, quote, prior notice, end quote, be given to Congress for each and every covert action project. As a matter of practice, the important and significant covert action programs will be discussed with the Oversight Committee in a form of partnership, and this is the way it should be. Quote, fully and currently informed, end quote, is language which has served us well in the atomic energy area. It has an already existing body of precedent that may be used as a guide for the future. It is flexible, like the Constitution, and provides a strong, broad base to work from. I am not prepared, to say, however, that in the years ahead there may not be some vitally sensitive situation of which Congress and the Oversight Committee should not be told in advance. While the likelihood of this occurring is not great, we should never foreclose with rigid statutory language possibilities which cannot be foreseen today. Our statutory language must be flexible enough to encompass a variety of problems and potential problems, yet rigid enough to ensure total accountability. Quote, fully and currently informed, end quote, accomplishes both purposes. Two, CIA publishing restrictions. In the area of restrictions on the CIA's publishing of various materials, I am in complete agreement that anything published in the United States by the CIA, or even sponsored indirectly by the CIA through a propriety, front, or any other means, must be identified as coming from the CIA. Publications overseas are another matter. We should allow the agency the flexibility, as we have in our recommendations, to publish whatever they want to overseas and to publish under whatever subterfuge is necessary and thought advisable. Footnote 15. Pausing the reading to read footnote 15. I do not view the, quote, domestic fallout, end quote, as a real problem. To be sure, some publications by the CIA abroad will find their way back to the United States. However, to try to impose severe restrictions to prevent such fallout would cause unnecessary damage to the CIA's valid production of propaganda and other publications abroad. Resuming the reading. Domestic intelligence recommendations. While the committee's domestic intelligence report represents an excellent discussion of the problems attendant to the field of intelligence, I feel several of the recommendations may present practical problems. Although our objective of achieving domestic intelligence reforms is the same, I differ with the majority of the committee in how best to approach the achievement of this goal. End of page 597. Beginning page 598. One, investigative standards. Scope of domestic security investigations. At the outset, I note that most of my concern is with the standards for investigations in the domestic security area stem from the fact that, quote, domestic security, end quote, is defined by the committee to include both the, quote, terrorism, end quote, and, quote, espionage, end quote, areas of investigation. Severe limitations prescribing the investigation of student groups are more readily acceptable when they do not also apply to terrorist groups and foreign and domestic agents involved in espionage against the United States. To include these disparate elements within the same, quote, domestic security, end quote, rubric, it seems to me will create unnecessary problems when it comes to the practical application of the theoretical principles enunciated in the committee's recommendations. A. Preventative intelligence investigations. The committee's recommendations limit the FBI's permissible investigations in these critical areas of terrorism and espionage under standards for what the committee delineates as preventative intelligence investigations. Under these standards, the FBI can only investigate where it has a specific allegation or specific substantiated information that an American or foreigner will soon engage in terrorist activity or hostile foreign intelligence activity, in brackets, emphasis added, end brackets. Footnote 16. Pausing the reading to read footnote 16. Committee Domestic Report, page 320. Resuming the reading. am not convinced that this is the best way to approach the real problem of limiting domestic intelligence investigation. While in theoretical terms, the standards of the recommendations may seem appropriate, I fear the inherent practical consequences of their application to the cold, real world of terrorism and espionage. The establishment of an imminency requirement by not permitting any investigation by the FBI unless the allegation or information received establishes that the person or group will, quote, soon engage, end quote, in certain activity might prohibit any number of legitimate and necessary FBI investigations. For example, an allegation of an assassination attempt on a public figure at an unspecified date in the future could be precluded from investigation, or vague information received by the FBI that there was a plan to obtain some nuclear components, but no indication of when or how could also be prohibited from investigation. Surely, matters such as these should be the valid subjects of investigation, no matter how vague or piecemeal the information is. Footnote 17. Pausing the reading to read footnote 17. My experience dictates that many investigations are begun with very limited or sketchy information. FBI agents and investigators in general are not always, or even often immediately presented with information which constitutes probable cause of a crime. Probable cause is often established only through painstaking investigation, putting bits and pieces together. I think we must take this into consideration when formulating threshold investigatory standards. Resuming the reading. B. Time limits. The committee's recommendations would limit any preliminary FBI investigation of an allegation of wrongdoing in the domestic security area to 30 days from the receipt of the information, unless the Attorney General, quote, finds, end quote, footnote 18, that the investigation need be extended for an additional 60 days. Pausing the reading to read footnote 18. It is unclear what standard is to be the predicate for any such finding. Resuming the reading. The FBI investigation may continue beyond 90 days only if the investigatory efforts establish, quote, reasonable suspicion, end quote, that the person or group will, quote, will soon engage in, end quote. End of page 598, beginning page 589. Terrorist or foreign espionage activities. Footnote 19. And even a full preventative intelligence investigation is not permitted to continue beyond, quote, 1 year, end quote, except upon a finding by the Attorney General of, quote, compelling circumstances, end quote. Footnote 20. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 19. Committee Domestic Report, pages 320 to 323. Footnote 20. Compelling circumstances is not further defined, so it is unclear what standards should be applied in making such a determination. Resuming the reading. While well-intentioned, I am not persuaded that these are workable standards. I just don't think we can categorize all investigations into these rigid time frames. Investigations just are not conducted that way. 30 days, for example, is probably not even enough time to obtain a license check return from some states. Moreover, limiting an investigation to 1 year may not be realistic when it applies to investigating a violence-prone group like the SLA or a Soviet Union espionage ring. These investigations are not easily or quickly accomplished. I do not believe that the creation of artificial time limits is the best way to approach the real concern of the committee, which is that we establish institutional controls on domestic security investigations. I would prefer approaching the control and accountability problems by providing periodic Department of Justice reviews of all categories of domestic intelligence investigations, not by imposing specific time limits upon all investigations. 2. Informants. The committee recommends broad new restrictions on the use of informants by the FBI. While our investigation has established that in the domestic intelligence field there have been numerous abuses in the use of informants, I do not think that the proposed recommendations are the best vehicles to achieve the needed reform. I cannot subscribe to recommendations limiting the use of informants to stringent time standards. Footnote 21. To limit use of informants to periods of, quote, 90 days, end quote. Footnote 22. Unless the Attorney General finds, quote, probable cause, end quote, that an American will, quote, soon, end quote, engage in terrorist or hostile foreign intelligence activity is impractical and unworkable. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 21. My concerns here parallel those I have with respect to the general investigatory standards recommended. Footnote 22. The committee allows an additional 60 days if the Attorney General finds, quote, compelling circumstances, end quote. Resuming the reading. When groups such as the SLA attempt to rob, kill, or blow up buildings, it is clearly necessary to cultivate informants who may provide some advanced warning. I am concerned that the committee's recommendations will preclude this vital function of the FBI. Moreover, specific time limits, it seems to me, will prove to be impractical. For example, at the end of the prescribed time, with not enough evidence for arrests, will informant X be terminated and be replaced by informant Y, who starts anew, or are informants thereafter banned from penetrating a particular group, even if violence-prone or involved in espionage? It should be remembered that informants are the single most important tool of the FBI and local police, for that matter, in the fight against terrorism and espionage, as well as organized crime, narcotics, and even the ever-pervasive street crimes of murder, rape, and robbery. Indeed, they are the very lifeblood of such investigations. Moreover, informants are involved in a wide spectrum of activities. End of page 599, beginning page 600. From attending public meetings to actual penetration attempts, I am concerned that theoretical and abstract restrictions designed only for, quote, domestic intelligence, end quote, if enacted, would soon limit our legitimate law enforcement efforts in many other fields as well. People and actions do not always fit nicely in neat little boxes labeled, quote, domestic intelligence, end quote, particularly in the terrorist and espionage areas, to which the proposed restrictions on informants would apply. Congress should carefully consider the scope and ramifications of any recommendations with respect to informants. It is my view that the better way to approach the problems encountered in the use of informants is to put their use under strict supervision of the Department of Justice. Creation of a special staff or committee for this purpose, centralized in the Department of Justice, would provide effective controls over the potential abuses in the use of informants, yet not hamstring their legitimate and valuable use. Footnote 23. Pausing the reading to read footnote 23. Attorney General Levi is in the process of establishing guidelines to regulate the use of informants. I recommend, however, that these guidelines be enforced through some appropriate form of Department of Justice review of the FBI's use of informants. Resuming the reading. 3. Electronic surveillance. I wholeheartedly support S3197, the new electronic surveillance bill sent to the Congress by President Ford. Footnote 24. Pausing the reading to read footnote 24. The bill enjoyed a bipartisan co-sponsorship of senators. Resuming the reading. It needs consolidated bipartisan support because it represents a significant advance from existing practice. For the first time, it will bring all governmental electronic surveillance under the scrutiny of judicial warrant procedures. I commend the efforts of President Ford in taking this extraordinary step forward in the regulation of electronic surveillance. In supporting S3197, I do not regard the existing wiretap presently maintained under the direction and control of the Attorney General Levi as being in violation of the Constitution. The present practice of electronic surveillance, authorization, and implementation rests upon a long-standing body of precedent which provides a firm constitutional base for their continued maintenance. The President's approach is to move from the present practice toward better practices and procedures for authorization. The abuses of electronic surveillance of the past clearly dictate a need for a system of judicial warrant approval. Under the President's proposal, the American people will be able to rest easy, assured that electronic surveillance will be employed carefully, yet when needed to combat serious criminal and espionage activities. I differ with a majority of the committee insofar as they recommend that before a judge can issue a warrant for electronic surveillance, he must find more than that an American is a conscious agent of a foreign power engaged in clandestine intelligence activities. The committee would require that probable cause be established for, quote, criminal activity, end quote, before a wiretap can be authorized. I think this departure from the S3197 standard would be a dangerous one because it would eliminate certain areas of espionage, particularly industrial espionage. End of page 600. Beginning page 601. From electronic surveillance. Many areas of espionage do not involve clearly criminal activity. Indeed, forms of espionage may not constitute a criminal offense, but should be the valid target of an espionage investigation. For example, a situation such as American Oil Company executives providing unclassified but important oil reserve information to a Soviet agent might not be a permissible subject of electronic surveillance if, quote, criminal activity, end quote, rather than hostile foreign intelligence were the standard. Footnote 25. I think the committee proposed standard would harm the FBI's espionage efforts and would therefore be a mistake. Pausing the reading to read footnote 25. Those involved in the obtaining of information about our industrial processes, vital to our national security, for our adversaries should be the legitimate subject of electronic surveillance, notwithstanding that no criminal statute is violated. I do not think we can afford to wait for exhaustive reform of our espionage laws. I note that the section of the proposed S1 dealing with espionage reform has presented great difficulty to the drafters. Indeed, drafting espionage into a criminal statute presents some of the same overbreadth problems that the committee has been concerned with in the domestic intelligence area. Resuming the reading. 4. Civil Remedies Statute. I oppose any broad new civil remedies statute in the field of domestic intelligence as both dangerous and unnecessary. It is dangerous because it could easily open the floodgates for numerous lawsuits filed seeking injunctive relief in the courts to thwart legitimate investigations. It is unnecessary because any substantial actions are already permitted under present Supreme Court decisions, such as Bivens versus United States, for violation of constitutional rights. There is simply no valid reason to carve out a broad new category of lawsuits for those not only injured by domestic intelligence methods, but, quote, threatened with injury, end quote. Footnote 26. Pausing the reading to read footnote 26. For example, would a cause of action exist simply because X notices a federal agent following him in an automobile, notwithstanding the nature or status of the particular investigation? Resuming the reading. No such statutory provisions are available for, quote, victims, end quote, in any other specific category of activity. The present avenues of relief provided by law today are clearly sufficient to address any future abuses in the domestic intelligence field. I note that we have not had the benefit of any sworn testimony from the many constitutional and criminal law experts in the country, either pro or con such a proposal. Without the benefit of an adequate record, and with my concern about the practical results of such a statute, I cannot support its enactment. Five, civil disorders. A final recommendation, which requires brief comment in the committee's proposed standards permitting the FBI to assist, quote, federal, state, and local officials in connection with a civil disorder, end quote. The committee's recommendation will not allow any investigation by the FBI, not even with preliminary in nature, unless the Attorney General finds in writing that, quote, there is a clear and immediate threat of domestic violence, end quote, which will require the use of federal troops. My reservation about this recommendation is that I think it deprives the Attorney General of the necessary flexibility in dealing with. End of page 601, beginning page 602. These delicate matters, i.e., civil disturbances, and might tend to exacerbate a possibly explosive situation. If the Attorney General is not allowed to dispatch FBI agents to the scene of disorders, it seems to me that we deprive him of the very means he needs to make the extraordinarily important decision as to whether federal troops are likely to be used. I believe the better practice would be to permit preliminary investigation by the FBI of potentially volatile situations, so that the Attorney General might make the most reasoned decision possible with respect to what I consider the drastic step of deploying federal troops to quell a civil disorder in one of our cities. Watergate-related inquiry. Finally, I wish to address briefly an area of the committee's investigation, which I pursued for the most part independently. At the close of the Senate Watergate investigation, I filed a report as part of my individual views, footnote 27, which outlined remaining areas of investigation with respect to the relationship between the Central Intelligence Agency and the former CIA employees who participated in the Watergate break-in, footnote 28. By virtue of my membership on this select committee, I have been able to pursue a further inquiry into these matters, and wish to thank the chairman and the vice chairman for the staff assistance and latitude provided me to pursue this area of investigation. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 27. Senate Watergate Committee Final Report. Senate Resolution 93-981, pages 1105 to 1165. Footnote 28. The, quote, action required, end quote, section of the report at pages 1150 to 1157 enumerated unresolved matters and identified materials not provided to the Watergate Committee by the CIA. Resuming the reading. Many of the concerns raised in the Watergate Committee investigation have been overtaken by time and events. For example, the reported references to illegal CIA domestic activities have now been confirmed as described in detail in the committee's report. The reference to the CIA maintaining a file on Jack Anderson, footnote 29, proved to be part of a lengthy investigation and physical surveillance of Anderson by the CIA during a, quote, leak, end quote, inquiry. Similarly, the dealing of Howard Hunt's post-retirement contacts with the CIA have been supplemented with still more such contacts. Footnote 30. Since July 1974, we have witnessed a variety of other disclosures relative to the CIA's domestic activities. Indeed, the creation of our Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Activities was due in part to the continuing public concern about these matters. Pausing the reading to read the footnotes. Footnote 29. Senate Watergate Committee Final Report, page 1128. Footnote 30. For example, this disclosure of personal correspondence dealing certain of Hunt's activities in 1971 and 1972 between Hunt and the CIA secretary stationed in Paris, whom Hunt sought to have reassigned to work for him at the White House. Resuming the reading. Unlike the Watergate Committee investigation of CIA activities, which was terminated because of the refusal of the CIA to turn over documents, footnote 31, this investigation was conducted in an atmosphere of cooperation. Pausing the reading to read footnote 31. By letter of March 7, 1974, former Director Colby informed the Senate Watergate Committee that certain items of requested information would not be made available to that committee. Such a withholding of timely information, including that which was totally exculpatory, unnecessarily focused an aura of suspicion and guilt. Resuming the reading. After some initial difficulties, which the committee encountered, end of page 602, beginning page 603, in a variety of areas, the cooperation afforded by the CIA was exemplary. In particular, I especially want to express my appreciation to former Director William Colby and present Director George Bush for cooperating to the fullest extent in this investigation. I also want to thank Ambassador Richard Helms and former Counterintelligence Chief James Angleton for their patience and extensive assistance in numerous conferences in trying to reconstruct the elusive details of this significant period. In pursuing this area of inquiry, the committee staff examined a great volume of highly sensitive material, much of which contained speculative matters and a multitude of information of marginal relevance. This information, which had not been made available in large part to the separate Watergate Committee, was examined in raw form and without sanitization deletions. Because of the sensitivity of the material, it was reviewed on the Central Intelligence Agency premises. Thus, it was in a spirit of cooperation that this examination was not accommodated, and this experience indicates that the Congress and the intelligence community can cooperate in an investigation without incurring unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. Footnote 32. Pausing the reading to read footnote 32. For example, the staff was given access to the Martinez contact reports, to which access was refused during the Watergate Committee investigation. In their entirety, this review was accomplished in secure facilities at the CIA, and no notes were taken of sensitive information contained in the reports not related to Hunt or in some other way relevant to the committee's inquiry. I cite this as an example of how a congressional investigation can be thorough and yet not threaten the integrity of CIA secret documentation containing names of officers and other highly classified information. Resuming the reading. At the close of this committee's examination of the available record, I wish to state my belief that the sum total of evidence does not substantiate a conclusion that the CIA per se was involved in the range of events and circumstances known as Watergate. Footnote 33. Pausing the reading to read footnote 33. I am filling with the committee the detailed results of this investigation in the form of classified memoranda. These memoranda will be turned over to the successor Permanent Oversight Committee to be kept in its secure files. No useful purpose would be served in further publicizing the contents, because much of it is fragmentary and its sum total reinforces the findings stated herein. Resuming the reading. However, there was considerable evidence that for much of the post-Watergate period, the CIA itself was uncertain of the ramifications of the various involvements, witting or otherwise, between members of the Watergate burglary team and members of components of the agency. Indeed, the CIA was apparently at times as perplexed by congressional investigators. Footnote 34. Pausing the reading to read footnote 34. Colby to Helms, letter of 28 January 1974. References 7 to 9 communications from Hunt while he was at the White House to Helms' secretary, with the query, quote, "Can you give us some idea as to what they were about?" End quote. Resuming the reading. It should be noted that the agency undertook an extensive internal inquiry in an effort to resolve these uncertainties. The investigation of Watergate and the possible relationship of the Central Intelligence Agency thereto produced a panoply of puzzlement. While the available information leaves nagging questions and contains bits and pieces of intriguing evidence, fairness dictates that an assessment be rendered on the basis of the present record. An impartial evaluation of that record compels the conclusion that the CIA, as an institution, was not involved in the Watergate break-ins. Howard H. Baker, Jr. End of page 603. Beginning page 604.